The inclusion seminar talk for this semester. And today we have our first Tennessee Tech computer science graduate speaking. Last in January, we had, I think, our first Tennessee Tech graduate to speak, but that person was not a computer science major. The person was a nursing major. So we have our first computer science major here. This is Mr. Luis Velasco, and I'm really excited about this. He was one of my students back in the year 2000. That was the first time I got to teach discrete math. Back then, it was numbered 161. It was before we had 4-digit course numbers. It changed to 1610, and now it's 2700. And he was in my class then, and he was in my data structures class as well. And the number on that class was 202 back then. And it changed to 2020. Now it's 1310, and it was in C. And Luis took the theory of computation class from me, and maybe something else as an undergraduate, I don't remember. And I tried to look back in the records, and our records don't go back past 2008 in the student record system. And I also had him in a graduate class as well. I don't remember what it was, and I tried to ask him, and things blur, memories blur. But I was a member of his graduate committee when he got his master's degree here, and Dr. Doug Talbert was his advisor. Who was your undergraduate advisor, Luis?
I think it was Dr. Hume.
David Hume, okay.
Yes.
Oh, I should have asked you that yesterday, because I could have invited him. I'm sorry about that.
That's right.
But, after Luis finished his master's degree, he taught as an instructor for us for a year. What was that, during the 2005 to 2006 school year?
Yes, that's correct.
And what classes did you teach then? Data structures was one of them, I remember.
Yeah, it was data structures and software engineering. And then I think there was like a intro to programming, which was, it was not computer science 101. It was like something that in Visual Basic, actually, and it was like meant for non-computer science students.
Oh,
I think.
yes,
Yeah.
that was Computer Science 1070. It was called Elementary Programming. I remember
correct.
that.
Yeah.
Cool. And I want to read Luis's official biography that he sent to us. But Luis, after his time at Tennessee Tech, went to Microsoft in Redmond, Washington, and he's been there ever since. And he has gradually increased his responsibilities, and he is a senior software engineer there. And I'll let him tell you more about that. But the official blurb: Luis is a senior software engineer in the search relevance team at Microsoft Bing. He's been at Microsoft since 2006 and has worked on a range of areas from maps, information retrieval, document quality, and location ranking. His current focus areas include deep learning, contextual ranking, and fairness in machine learning. And yesterday, I went to LinkedIn to look at Luis's profile, and he has done a lot of courses from Coursera and has gotten a certification in machine learning. Is that right, Luis?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So let us welcome Luis for his talk. And I'm so glad he's here today, at least virtually.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very mumuch, Dr. Cosa.
You're
it's
welcome.
been a really long time. It's nice to see you and hear you as well. Yeah, so I'm Luis Velasco. I'm originally from Mexico. My mom is from the US and my dad was Mexican. And so I grew up mostly in Mexico. I grew up bilingual. So at least when I came to study in the US, it wasn't like a complete language change for me. I'm currently, like Dr. Cosa said, I'm in the relevance team for Bing. And although my title is software engineer, have more the role of a data scientist right now. At Microsoft, apparently HR doesn't like to change titles around that much. So even though everybody I work with, their official title is data scientist because they joined after I did, my title is the same, but so has remained the same. But I have been a software engineer, like Dr. Kosa mentioned. I started out actually as a software tester for what was Bing Maps or live search back then when I originally joined Microsoft. And I was there for a few years. Eventually got tired of just testing and software and decided, to move over to like core search, what we called it. And so I've done a bunch of things all the way from working with C# and C++ in our backend stack where every millisecond really counts. So like, sometimes we have latency budgets of, like 7 milliseconds. If you're over that, then that's it for you. So we have to, so I worked a lot with the document processing. And so now I'm in relevance. And so essentially, our main goal is to make sure that we show you the right results. And I've worked in several things there under that. But I guess today I don't necessarily want to focus just like on what I did at Microsoft or what I've done here. Mostly, I guess I want to talk a little bit about, how I got started with in school and in computer science. I guess as a lot of like kids or people, I guess that I know, I was kind of like the typical high school computer nerd. I knew everything there was to know about computers. I knew how to, do things that my high school computer teachers didn't know how to do. I loved taking my computer apart, putting it back together, breaking it in ways, and trying to figure, and the software and put it back together, make sure it was still, I still had a functioning computer for my parents, right? Because at the time, computers were still pretty expensive. We only had one at home. And so, like ever since the beginning, I was like, okay, I want to study computers. So what does that really mean? I guess I didn't really know. And it wasn't until kind of weirdly, after watching the computer Hackers, which is the movie Hackers, which is, in retrospect, a pretty bad movie, especially when it comes to what computing is. But that seemed kind of exciting. I was like, oh, I think I want to learn how to program. And so we didn't necessarily, this was back in 1996 or so. And so there really weren't like, let's say, online courses. And everything I think that I could find was like, oh, you had to learn like C or C++. And that was all very obscure to me. And so during high school, I didn't really try to bother too much with that. But I knew that I wanted to study programming. And so that's how I ended up with computer science, because that's, I asked around when I was looking at colleges and they're like, oh yeah, computer science would be like what you want to study. So I'm like, okay, that's great. I didn't really have an understanding of to what all that necessarily meant. I just thought, okay, programming, building websites, making programs, how difficult can that be? And so it wasn't until I, my first semester that, I'm taking, okay, intro to computing, intro to programming. And so that was, just programming itself in C. And I was enjoying that. I liked that. I was doing well. But my, what was the class? The discrete math class. I was actually starting to struggle with that one. I had actually taken calculus and logic in high school. And so I had the idea that, it's like, okay, I can do this. This is stuff that I know, discrete math pretty much starts out like logic, or logic is, or discrete math is a branch of logic, I guess, or vice versa, depending. And so at first I was like, okay, this is good. I know this, I can do this. But little by little, I started, kind of like feeling overwhelmed. And there wasn't necessarily, a feeling, like I started getting the feeling that, okay, oh, maybe computing isn't, computers aren't like the thing for me. It's like I wanted to learn how to program. That's what I wanted. And so then, but there's these other classes that aren't, you know, you don't necessarily imagine them. And at the time, you don't necessarily imagine them being useful either for programming, but in reality they are. But in any case, uh, I remember, I think I ended up getting a C in that class.
It was a
And
B.
it was a B. Okay, good. It wasn't that bad. I guess it was worse than I thought. I guess I imagined it being worse at the time. But I did also, it wasn't just that class, like you are also required to take calculus. And so, because I had taken calculus in high school, I decided not to take the, like I guess remedial math classes or the maybe I should have taken. And so I actually ended up flunking calculus one my first semester. At the time, I guess I didn't understand the concept of dropping classes, I thought it's like, no, I can do this. I'm not necessarily like super good at math, but if I work through it, I can do it, right? And so at some point I thought I could recover, and eventually it's like, nope, I did not pass that class, and so obviously I had to retake it. And so, it, at some point, I also remember thinking, it's like, well, maybe, okay, this is just, my first semester. I'm getting used to a new country, a new, even though I've been like bilingual my whole life, I didn't necessarily ever have classes in English. All my classes were always in Spanish, of course, because I was in Mexico. And so I'm like, okay, it's first semester, new stuff. I can kind of recover from this. That's fine. And so eventually in my second semester, I don't remember all the classes that I took in my second semester, but I think then, in data structures, I remember struggling through that one as well. Data structures, especially once we got to like, I think it was like the KD trees is the one that really stumped me. Balancing those trees was, I find that actually to be pretty tricky at the time. And so maybe that's the course I got to see it. I don't remember. But at the end of that semester, of my second semester, I really remember going and thinking, it's like, wow, I like programming. I enjoy that, but I am not doing so well in my other computer science classes. I also remember thinking, it's like, well, maybe computer science itself exactly isn't what I should focus on. Maybe I should, look around and see what other computer, related things I could do. Especially because I guess I remember comparing myself to other students in my class. Like there were lots of other people that, they were always participating in class. They seemed to always understand the topic. They kind of seem to breeze through things. But here, I was, I still liked computers. I still liked what I did, but I was finding it difficult to get through some of these initial classes. And so then at the time, I think at the end of my second semester, I remember thinking, okay, what else could I do if not like computer science? And I think I remember at the time the kind of like the fallback for computer science was MIS, which was taught, I think, by the business school. And so, I actually knew a few people that ended up switching from computer science to MIS once they're like, oh my gosh, I have to take all this calculus and physics classes. That's not what I want to do, or I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through the hassle through that. And so they ended up changing. And so I was also thinking, it's like, well, maybe should I change? But later, like when I looked at the curriculum, I saw it's like, oh no, you have to take business classes. And honestly, for me, that was like, ugh. I think you'd rather take calculus than business classes. And so, Also, I guess there was, like the cool factor of being able to say, hey, I'm a computer scientist versus, hi, I'm an MIS student. I guess I don't know what, I'm a computer guy. I don't know. There was kind of just some of that, silly kind of things that you think when you're younger about how your title sounds. But so, at the end of my second semester, it's like I was still not doing great in my classes, but I decided, to, stick it out a little bit longer. I think it was, maybe a little bit of a mixture of possibly stubbornness and also maybe some determination that is like, no, I really want to, program. And I think the right place for me is computer science. And so I think in retrospect, it's, I guess I got lucky in a way that at that point, nobody necessarily told me, this isn't for you, even though that is what I was thinking. And I actually watched one of your speakers talks from last November, I think Jessica Robinson. Something that stuck out for me in her case was that for her, when she was actually struggling through some of her classes, a TA actually told her, this isn't for you. And for her, that was like the defining moment, where she decided to leave and change her major to something else, right? And and when I was thinking, when I saw that, that was like, wow, I guess I was really lucky that no one did that to me or said that to me, because it's not necessarily that that you know what you want to do at that stage, right? And so then if you're struggling a little bit and you don't get the support that you're looking for, anything can kind of like, make you leave whatever you're originally interested in. And so, to me, that also kind of brought up the question is like, well, I mean, obviously she went to different school and whatnot, but, why is it that, even though I was not necessarily a stellar student, at the time I was struggling through some of my classes, I think we always see some of those like Calculus 1 and Calculus 2 classes kind of, I remember we used to call them weed out courses. I don't know if, we still consider that, but people they were there in a sense, to make sure that you'd be willing to put up with the struggles of, I guess, like, or the difficulty of computer science. But it's at that moment, I kind of like realized it's like, wow, I actually, the privilege that I have, doesn't, I was lucky that it did not affect me in school, and so I think it's important to bring that up because particularly, well, currently in our society, and then also this happens a lot in tech, we have an issue with having women and people of color in tech, and there's usually this feeling of, that people aren't welcome. And so I remember I've read a lot of stories about women in particular that say, yeah, I had a teacher, or I had somebody that at some point told me, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do this. And so I'm not saying that that would ever happen at tech. I've always encountered very nice people and very supportive people at tech. But I think that this is great that you're having like these diversity and inclusion talks, because it is important. I was a medium student, and I didn't necessarily have those roadblocks that like other people would have had. And so if I didn't have that sort of issue, there's no reason that other people would need to have to put up with that sort of roadblock, even though they're struggling or whatever it is. Even if they're not, even if they're doing great, some people in our society have to put up with new roadblock, certain roadblocks that other of us don't. And so I think it's important for me to like acknowledge that, because I also don't want to come off saying it's like, yeah, I struggled at first, and just with grit and determination, I got past it. And so that's not the case really ever for anyone. Um, you know, um, so and anyway, um, for me, um, at that point, I was asking myself, should I continue with computer science? And it really was very uh, a little bit of a tough question for me, because yeah, I mean, I didn't like getting necessarily bad grades. Um, they weren't great, they weren't bad either, but but I decided to stick with it. I'm like, okay, no, computing is what I want to do. Let's keep on doing this. Um, and so I guess it wasn't until after I took a directed studies class with Dr. Kosa, that I said, that I had like the realization that I could actually, do this. Yes, this is really for me. So I think I remember thinking, it's like, wow, I got an A in this course with Dr., which was one of, in my opinion, was one of the tougher teachers. I had never managed to get an A with her before. And then here I go, and, I think I was a junior, and now I get an A in one of her classes. And so that was kind of like the turning point for me. Um, and, at that point, I was like, I still had to take calculus 2, I think, or physics. I had actually put off physics, which uh, maybe was for the best. Maybe if I would have done bad in physics, then maybe I would have, at first, maybe I would have dropped out of computer science, but I stuck with it. And so eventually I had, I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter if I have to take computer science. I'm just going to stick with this. I can do this. This isn't as bad as it is. Um, and it, wasn't, I guess, until much later, once I was out of college, out of my master's and stuff, that I realized that it's like, I'm not the only one that kind of like struggled through school at first. There was actually a recent tweet from a NASA engineer that was trending. And I think he said is like, when he was in college, he had gotten a 2.4 GPA in his first semester, and he felt that he wasn't cut out for engineering. Of course, now he has helped land 2 rovers on Mars and is designing one for the moon. So, I think his whole thing, I guess playing off the pun of the rovers' curiosity and perseverance, was that you need to have curiosity and perseverance to succeed, even if at first you have issues. And so to me, that was like very, I guess comforting, because it's one of those things that you don't necessarily realize at the time, that when you're taking some of these classes, you're struggling through some of these things, you find them difficult, albeit, I did remember finding them interesting as well, even though they were fairly difficult. But I guess like the point was that you sometimes just need to push through the bad. Maybe if you have some discouragement at first, you kind of need to go through that. Push through it, regardless of what some TA might have mentioned to you, or some other person might have said. There's I think for me also, after that class with Dr. Kosa, I think Dr. Kosa, I remember getting a lot of encouragement from you, um, and I think that's also one of the reasons why I ended up, getting my master's there at Tech, because it was both, I think, you and Dr. Talbert that, said, oh, I think you should maybe, why don't you come to our graduate program? And so, that was actually very influential for me. And so if you're for example, a TA, if you're or even if you're one of the other students, that does well in class, I think it's much better or important for you to uh, think about how other people are, going through the same experience than you might be. Um, it might be different for them. They might have certain struggles that you don't. You sometimes have, if you're a TA, maybe you think, oh, I breezed through this class, and so maybe this person doesn't cut out for it. But you never really know that unless you've really sat down with them. And so I think one of the important things to do is that, you need to be there for others. And so I guess I consider myself a, shy introvert. I don't necessarily put myself out there. I never did that in college. I never necessarily went out and went looking for a lot of extra help. Um, but and I think a lot of us are kind of like that, right? And so um, I think looking for others that are kind of struggling the same way that you are is actually quite beneficial, because you can um, see how others are actually going through this, and you can eventually realize that, well, you're not alone, right? Um, and so anyway, um, I think after, being a junior, and I started doing better in my classes, I was enjoying them a lot more. Um, uh, and I eventually, well, like I said, I got my master's and ended up coming to Microsoft. And so I think one of the main things that I learned at Tech, well, I guess there were two main things that I learned at Tech, aside from obviously course material. And one is that you just have to keep, what is it called? What do we call it nowadays? Um, uh, uh, a learning attitude. So um, uh, we, we sometimes tend to think that we just get, we need to learn these courses, and that's what's going to get me through. But I think uh, having an attitude of continued learning, um, yes, thank you, growth mindset. Thanks, April. Having the growth mindset is actually something that helped me a lot. I guess I didn't necessarily realize it at the time, but that's kind of what we um, helped me, because uh, my classes were, I'm like, oh, why do we have to take, I don't know, automata theory, for example? And you might think, okay, this is never going to be useful, but actually, when I was in the document understanding team and being, one of the first things I had to do was work with a finite state machine for parsing addresses. And so actually my class actually came in helpful. So you never know when you're gonna need this stuff. And so the other is that you wanna always stay curious about the new things that you don't know about. So it wasn't until I think I took intro to machine learning with Dr. Talbert that I was like, wow, this is actually really cool. At the time, all I wanted to do was, yeah, maybe I'll just, become a programmer, build web pages. And that's kind of like what my focus was. But then it wasn't, once I took that class, it's like, wait, no, I don't think I just want to build, be a programmer. I think I also want to do this machine learning stuff. And I guess it worked out pretty well, because, machine learning was kind of like starting to take off around that time. We didn't have deep learning then, but I mean, well, we had neural networks. And right now we just call it deep learning, because I guess we figured out how to make them work better. but even once I got to Microsoft, I started as a software tester. And so that was, pretty, like, I guess I would call it like mundane work. It's like you just, especially it was UI testing. It wasn't even, like API testing or anything of that sort. And so I did that for about 5 years. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting pretty tired of this stuff. I think I need to do something else. And so I remember applying for a few jobs as a software developer then, even at Microsoft, right? And so you still have to jump through all the interview hoops, unfortunately. But I remember one of the main managers at one point when I applied to his group, he's like, "Oh, you don't have you don't have developer experience, so I'm not even going to give you the interview." He pretty much almost like told me that almost verbatim. I mean, maybe slightly differently. And I was like, "You should just apply to our testing team." And so I'm like, "Okay, fine. I'll." I was kind of tired about my specific team. So I wanted something new, something different. And so I applied to the testing team for under this other manager. Luckily for me, eventually, they decided to merge the test team and the dev team. And so curiously, a couple of years afterwards, I ended up getting a couple promotions under the same manager that at some point told me that I wasn't cut out to even get an interview in his team. So my point is that even after school, at school, you go through a certain set of issues. And then once you're out of school, well, you're going to go through a whole different set of another set of issues to get where you want to go. And so nowadays, I'm mostly working with machine learning and deep learning. But at the time in school, deep learning wasn't a thing. I took like the one computer science, the one machine learning class Dr. Talbert taught, and then as a grad student, we took a couple other more advanced machine learning classes. But then, that was like, 6 or 7 years after I had graduated that I started to need machine learning again. And so that's where having like the growth mindset and kind of helped me, because I'm like, okay, I know certain things about machine learning. I don't know like the most recent developments. Let's go learn about them. And I think that's one of the most important things that you're going to get or should get out of college, is that especially I guess in computers, there's certain things that'll never change, like discrete math isn't necessarily going to suddenly like be revolutionized in a way like compared to maybe some other technologies. But I think the main thing that you need to learn is to that even once you're out of college and out of grad school, you are going to have to keep on learning no matter what it is that you do. And so having the curiosity to keep pushing forward and keep on having that lifelong learning is one of the main things that kind of has helped me get to where I am. I'm never going to be a CEO. I'm never going to be like, a vice president. That's not what I want. I like what I do right now. It's, maybe eventually I'll advance to something else, who knows, right? But the point is that, I am not one of those guys that, yeah, that's going to tell you, yeah, you just need to push through something and get it done. There's a lot of different ways of going through it. Sometimes you take the long way. Sometimes you take, sometimes it's easier for others. And so, especially for someone like me that, like I mentioned, I was an introvert, or I guess I still am. I don't necessarily like talking to a lot of people, even though I'm doing that right now. But I think a lot of us feel, especially during school, we feel kind of we can feel overwhelmed by it. But if you can find a teacher that is willing to help you, if you find other students that are going through the same situation that you are, I think that actually can be very helpful to you. And so, I would also say, it's like once you start out, and you struggle through things at first, don't get too discouraged, because everybody kind of seems to go through this. Going back to that tweet from this NASA engineer, once I was reading through all of the posts of people replying to that, there was like a lot of people that are saying, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And now, I have a PhD, and now I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing in medicine or biology or engineering or whatever it was. And so, yeah, there will be some students that are, straight A students. I wasn't one of them. And I struggled at first a bit, but, it's something that you can get through. It's, if it's something that you really want to do, there are ways of doing it. I also don't want to say that you should just stick with something if you're really bad at it. I mean, there's nothing bad either with realizing halfway through that it's like, no, wait, this major isn't for me. I'll change to something else. That's, totally fine too. You shouldn't stay, I guess, in maybe a bad analogy, you shouldn't stay in a bad relationship and persevere through that. It's like, so if your bad relationship is your major or your courses, maybe you should find something else that actually interests you. And so as you go along through college, you'll find that there's many different things that you will be interested in. At first, you'll think one thing, and then you think another, and then eventually you end up, even far away from what you originally thought you were going to use or do right after college. Maybe you do that for a little bit, and then eventually you change to something completely different. I think there's a lot of people that I know that have pretty much followed that path. They study one thing in college, and they're doing something completely different now because that's what they ended up liking. And there's nothing wrong with that either, right? So yeah, I guess I don't want to like bore you too much with like details of the rest of my studies or necessarily stuff at Microsoft. So I don't know if then there's people have any questions or comments.
Hi, yes, I actually have a question.
Yes.
First off, I wanted to say your talk is so inspiring, and it's exactly what I needed to hear right now as I'm struggling through calculus and all of that.
Okay.
So you mentioned how you didn't want to say that grit and determination is how you made it, because while that can be inspiring, it is tough because even let's say you're dealing with someone who did work really hard and still messed up big time, and they just are at a brick wall. Do you have any advice on people who are in computer science? Like, I'm decent at math, but I'm not the math whiz, It's not like mathematics is why I'm in computer science. Although I appreciate people who are like that. It's just not me. So much so, I had people telling me never to be an engineer or whatever. But how did you overcome the struggle of math? Do you have any advice for people who are just, they're at a brick wall and they're just trying to figure it out and they just can't? And so much so, it makes people drop the major just because of that one math class.
Yeah, well, I would say don't do what I did. Actually, I think like I mentioned, I had trouble reaching out necessarily. And getting help. So maybe once I think I was a senior and I was looking back at this, I was like, you know what, maybe I should have actually gone back and taken the remedial math class before calculus. Maybe my algebra wasn't actually as strong as it needed to be, even though I had taken calculus in high school, it was just like derivatives, and we had barely gotten into integrals, and that's when I hit like the wall, right? I would say that go and ask for help. Find other students that are kind of going through the same thing. Find those that can help you understand the topic. Obviously, I would also say, talk to your teachers. Tell them, hey, I'm actually struggling with this class right now. How can I get through this? What do I need? For me, it was, I ended up taking calculus 1 twice. I took calculus 2 twice. And so I think that's why I say, don't do what I did. I just kind of like said, no, I'm going to do this. And it was maybe stubbornness, but I would have really benefited from some extra help. I would have benefited from going back and reviewing some of my earlier math classes. So, maybe if it's, taking it during, one of those other classes during summer school, I mean, I did end up taking summer school a few times for other classes, not computer science or math, but because I had to repeat those two classes, like I think taking summer school helped me still graduate in 4 years, because I was, I didn't necessarily have to spend extra time with that. So, I would say, you can do this. It's yeah, you might not necessarily get an A. I didn't get an A. Like I said, I can do math. It's not my strong point. It's like my wife, she's like an electrical engineer, and she'll like jump math hoops around me while I'm trying to figure stuff out in my head. And so I ask around for help, I would say, but most importantly, believe that you can actually do it, because it's a stepping stone. Just if you really want to do computers, okay, yeah, we have these classes, but yeah, I would say, mostly try to find somebody else that can help explain it in a way that you can understand it, right? I mean, maybe there's also a lot of I guess now we have the benefit that there's a lot of online resources. Like YouTube didn't exist when I was in school. I think I have gone back and learned a lot of things from YouTube videos, as odd as that may seem, or review things from YouTube videos. Sometimes, I think I ended up learning that I am more of a visual learner. And so, sometimes when I was in class, I think that's one of the reasons why I struggled, was that, things are just on the board, but like I had trouble imagining certain things. And maybe now when I go and look at these certain YouTube videos, I'm like, oh, wow, I like totally get this, because for me, my way of learning is more visually. So maybe you can also find a lot of different ways that things can explain the topic. And also, like Dr. Kosa said, there's also office hours.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I do usually reach out to help. I really know my professors really well, but it inspires me to keep doing that, because I think that's how I'm getting by in the hard math subject. So thank you for your response.
Yeah, you're welcome, and good luck.
I think something that Mimi said was important. By the way, Luis, thank you for joining us here today. I think something that Mimi said is important, that remembering that you're here for the CS degree. You're not here to be a math major. And I think it's a matter of using that piece of motivation to help you with, keeping the focus on those other reasons. So, I will often tell people if they're going to leave the major because of the math, then maybe we ought to talk a little bit about, getting other help and thinking about why we're here. Because I think that bit of motivation is helpful. But I wanted to, I mentioned this earlier, and Luis, I don't know if you saw my comment while you were talking. I wanted to make sure that I got this out there, that there is no such thing as a weed out course.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And we don't sit in our offices and think about like, what are the ways that I can like jettison students from the program? Like there is no such thing as that. And honestly, it's quite the contrary. And I know April's involved in this with some of our introductory courses, where we're trying to find the best ways to get you through the courses. We're trying to find the best ways to help you learn. And unfortunately, this isn't universal. It's not like we don't have control over what happens in other programs, like the math programs or whatever else, and whoever else teaches those courses. But we are here, and the stream of other things that I'm seeing here about students at office hours and that people, there are faculty members and TAs and others that are really here to help you progress through the program. All right, so Luis, my question though, I do have a question for you, and it's this. I'm interested in hearing about what your experience has been at Microsoft in regards to diversity, and especially being on diverse teams. I know that Microsoft has tried to do its best in making something like that happen, and certainly is in the type of position to be able to build diverse teams. So what are you seeing in regards to the makeup of teams? Like, how diverse have they been? And if you've been on different teams where it's like, this team wasn't very diverse and this one was, did you see differences in innovation and other capabilities of those teams, especially in regards to like the viewpoints that people bring? So anyway, I'd like to hear what you've experienced in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to start by saying, yes, Microsoft is actually a very diverse place. I don't think I've ever been on a team where I'm not working with at least, people from 5 other countries. Now, saying that, Microsoft, like any tech company, has an issue with having women and people of color in keeping them also at Microsoft, right? But I think in the last few years, there's especially after we got our new, after Bill Gates left, and once we have our new CEO, Satya Nadella, he has actually been, I think, a great driver for making sure that Microsoft stays and gets to be a diverse and inclusive space. I think one of the, like right now, we have to take extra training on diversity. We have to take extra training on, especially on implicit bias and on biases, because I mean, even though, I work with, I've had teams where I work with, people from all over the world. Yes, we were all men there. I guess luckily right now in my team, my team is rather small. It's just 5 people, and my boss is a woman, and there's an Iranian PhD that I work with as well, and she also, and so, and then in the slightly broader team, we also have a few other women in leadership positions, and I think the main, or like the best thing about like having diverse teams is specifically having those completely different viewpoints, because we tend to be with stay around with people or think like people like us, right? We tend to group ourselves with people that are like us, and so we're all going to have kind of like that same idea, and so then or the same way of thinking. And so it's not until you talk to somebody with that grew up in a completely different part of the world, and somebody that had completely different education that you did, or has different experiences, that they can come in and bring in new, and they do, and they bring new and different ideas. And I don't think there's ever been one of our in our meetings, like when we're discussing ideas, things don't necessarily ever, there's like the initial concept, but the end idea always ends up being so different because we get so much and more input from everybody. We get input from our PMs and from our developers and from the data scientists. And so everybody brings in something unique, and having that diverse perspective of things, excuse me, has been, I think, one of the main drivers and main things that has helped with innovation, and not just with us, at many other places. But I do want to acknowledge that, like all tech companies, we do have an issue with diversity, and sometimes even keeping people. There's the initial drive of bringing people to you, but then there's also people staying there. And so I think that's one of the main things that you see when you talk to women and people of color, that they were in tech, but then they left. And so I think one of the main things that Microsoft internally is trying to do is make everybody feel welcome, no matter if you're Black or Hispanic or Asian or gay or bisexual or whatever it is that you are welcome. And that's what Microsoft is trying to do. And I mean, it's probably not going to be something we're ever going to finish. I mean, it's a difficult topic, and there's deep biases, in whatever we do. It's like we're not the only ones with bias. It's like Indian men will have bias against women, and it's because of the culture they grew up in. I'm not saying at all that like everybody is like that. I'm just I know it's probably a really bad generalization, but it's something that happens, right? There's certain cultures that we work with, or lots of cultures, and the way and attitudes towards certain peoples are always different. And so yes, we bring in a lot of new ideas. It helps a lot with the products. It helps a lot with innovation. But we also need to make sure that everybody feels welcome, and I think that's what Microsoft is trying to do, and I hope we get to that.
Always forget to unmute myself. Does anyone have any last minute questions for Luis?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it was very broken up. I don't think I could hear correctly.
Christine, if the internet's given some trouble to you today, you can type it in the chat if you want. I think she might have gotten kicked off. Hopefully she'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
You can type it in the chat, Christine. It sounds like you're having some sound troubles.
Yeah.
Why don't we try to resolve that? And Christine, if you could send a message directly to Dr. Kosa. I do want to mention one thing. I don't know if you all saw this. I put a statement out earlier this week about violence and racism and hate speech against the Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi American communities. And if you get an opportunity, you can access that through the department's blog. April has just shared that link here in the chat. There's a number of resources and other things that are there that are meant not just for that community, not just for the APITA community, but actually for all of us. If you experience any of that, any hate speech or otherwise, whatever it may be, there's counseling available. There's resources of folks that you can receive other assistance from. So please take a look at that link. Please take a look at the information is there. And I just wanted to reiterate that our expectations here in the department, our expectations here in the university, I think are, we don't find this rhetoric of hate, the rhetoric that's been happening is just unacceptable. And it's not something that we want to see, not just in our community, but anywhere at Tennessee Tech. And so, we hope really what we're building is an inclusive community, that we're developing one where people feel like they're part of something rather than being excluded in any way. So anyway, there's not much more that I think I really can say about that, other than please take a look at that write-up or that blog post. Please take a look at the resources, and then reach out to any of us, any of the faculty, or any of those contacts that are listed there if you need any assistance.
Yeah, I'm really glad about that. Yeah, thank you for putting out statements like that, Dr. Ganad.
One last minute question for Luis, because we've got to go because people have class at 12. Luis, is it okay? It looks like Christine has had some internet trouble and she got kicked off. Can I send her your email address so she can contact you with the question?
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you. So last call for questions.
It's not a question, but it's a comment.
Okay, that's it.
Luis, I also want to thank you for kind of coming out about how you struggled in school and stuff. I have a lot of people in my life in computer science who are like, oh, I didn't study and made all A's and B's in college. It's no problemo. And to hear someone who is very accomplished and works at Microsoft, but who also struggled, I feel it's wonderful, and I really appreciate that. So I want to thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. I'm proud of you. And keep up the great work. And thank you for speaking to our students today and to us. We all learned something.
Okay, good. Well, I was glad to be here.
Luis, I'm sorry for just now talking. Martha and I are sharing an office space, and so I didn't want the sound to be crazy, but I really appreciate your time in talking with us. I think your speech was very, just very important for so many students. I think it would have been helpful to me as a student as well, because it sounds like our backgrounds are very similar. So,
yeah, of course, you're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad I could be here. If anybody, if you wants to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I guess just like a last minute pitch as well, if you want to come work for Microsoft, we have tons of internships, paid internships with even housing, so you don't have to worry about that. And so, even if you're a freshman, we have internships from like freshmen to PhD students. So I would say go find the Microsoft careers page, and there's like a link I think there for like internships. And I would love to have more Tennessee Tech students over here. So if you want any resources or any help, I'm happy to help anybody that wants to get more info. I can try to hook you up with recruiters or give you any resources. But I'd love to have more people over here as well. So,
Luis, do you know if internships for the summer are still being filled?
Well, usually we might have mostly had them all filled by now, but if we do work with since we have students from all over the world, internships actually happen pretty much at any time during the year. And so, depending on where you're at, we might actually have an internship for you. So I would say, look at the careers page and, submit your resume there. And you might, I guess I can't give you a concrete answer whether they're all
Right, that's
filled,
fine.
but my guess
That's fine.
whether
Do
might be.
you think you could get us the link, maybe get it to April,
Yeah.
get the specific link out? Because I know this in conversations that I've been having with students, there are many students that are still looking for summer internships. And a lot of this has to do with not how Microsoft is operating necessarily, but how other companies are operating right now. And they've reduced the number of internships because of just sort of uncertainty of the summer. And certainly that was the case last summer. So anything that you could do, especially as a graduate of our program, if there's anything that you could do to help our students and help those that are currently here find internships, especially at a place like Microsoft, I think that would be a great experience for a lot of our students. We would absolutely appreciate that help.
Yeah, of course. I'll see if I can find the recruiter for like the Tennessee area, and see maybe if I can hook you guys up with her. I guess in terms of like internships, I think we are, or at least last summer all the internships were remote actually. So yeah, you might not get to come to Redmond this year if you get an internship. It'll most likely be remote, but I think we're hiring people, for full-time jobs as well. So I don't think we necessarily have I guess we're lucky that we don't have the problems some other smaller, maybe tech companies have with recruiting and our budgets right now. I mean, working online has been great for Microsoft, and I guess that's reflected in the amount of people we've been hiring. So
yeah, I think we'd really love to have Microsoft on our list of companies that regularly come, like specifically are looking at Tennessee Tech students, trying to build that, but it's definitely a thing where we need insiders to help us with that. So anyway, any help, any assistance that you can give us in that regard would be appreciated.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm gonna jump off. It's been nice seeing you again, Luis.
Yeah, it was nice to see you too.